Bandwidth for changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com, and we're hosted on Linode servers. Head to linode.com/changelog.
I am Copy Construct, and this is Go Time.
It's Go Time, a weekly podcast where we discuss interesting topics around the Go programming language, the community, and everything in between. If you currently write Go or aspire to, this is the show for you. All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Go Time. Today's episode is number 57. We've been gone for a couple of weeks. Our production studio was actually in Houston, but good news is that Adam and family are all doing well. So we are back on today on the show. Myself, Eric St. Martin, Brian Kettleson's here. I think he's still here. Brian.
Muted?
All right, maybe muted, but still, I'm here. The dog was barking.
And Carlicia.
Hi, I'm here, definitely.
And our special guest today is Cindy, also known on Twitter as Copy Construct. And I'm sure many of you have probably read a lot of her operations and DevOps posts that have been gaining some popularity recently. Welcome to the show, Cindy.
Thanks for having me.
See, she's not on mute, Brian.
Thanks, Eric.
So for anybody who's not familiar with you or in some of your work, do you want to give just like a little rundown your history? And
Sure. To be very honest, I mean, it's kind of a little strange for me because I have been programming for over half my life. I started back in 2003, 2004 when I was 13 years old, and it started with me programming for school because we had computer science classes, and I remember being really, really bad at it. I wasn't very good, and what that made me do was spend almost an entire summer doing nothing but programming, just to get better at this thing, which I didn't consider myself to be very good at. And what happened was I spent 6 to 8 weeks doing quite literally nothing else but programming. And at the end of it, it wasn't really a struggle anymore. It just became extremely enjoyable and just became really fun. And, 13, 14 years later, still remains the same. So that really is how I got my start.
so here's a question, because like a lot of us talk about this type of stuff too. Like, so you said when you got started, you didn't think you were very good at it. How do you feel about your work now? Because I know, like, personally, it's like I went through this cliff, like, through teenage years trying to learn programming. I thought I was terrible. Then I went through like this inflated ego phase, like in my late teens and early 20s, where I thought I was awesome at it. And now, way later in my career, I think I'm terrible at it again. Like, I don't know enough. There's too much to know.
So I don't ever think I was particularly. I still don't think I'm particularly good at it. I'd just like to think that I'm improving. I've definitely improved a lot over the years. When I started, I wasn't really building software. It was just programming, which is I think there's a huge chasm between just writing some code and actually doing it professionally for a living, because software engineering as such is just so much more than just writing code, right? And I don't particularly think I'm the best programmer right now, and I also don't think I'm necessarily the best at software engineering. But what I strive to do is try to get better, because just like you said, I think there's just so many people we can learn from, and just so much that pretty much anyone still needs to learn about just so many various things. I don't really think it's ever going to be possible for one person to sort of completely understand everything that there has to do with software development. There's just way, way, way too much. But what we can do, or at least what I strive to do, is to continually get better at it, right? Because if I'm doing that, I think I'm doing okay. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what matters to me.
I think that's why so many people call it a practice instead of
Hmm.
something else. You have to continually practice and improve.
Pretty much. But I also think it's possible for some, and some people actually do this, where they go very, very deep into one particular field, right? It can either be security, or it could be web development, or it could be systems programming, or very, very low level programming, or even, for instance, JavaScript programming, or very high level. So, that's very possible, and I see a lot of people doing that. And for me, at least for now, I would consider myself a very generalist software engineer. That's kind of also what I really want to be doing for the next few years. Just sort of have a baseline understanding of a lot of different things, and keep doing that.
Yeah, I think having a broad view of the landscape is kind of fun and it allows you to not get bored. You can kind of
Yeah.
switch over to stuff but I mean, it gets you at that like you wish you were like really, really super knowledgeable, like more knowledgeable in a particular area, especially like when it starts gaining popularity or people are starting to use it for really interesting things. And you're like, wow, I wish I spent more time like going deeper down that path. But I think the flip side of that is had you done that, there's other paths that, you'd be like, wow, like now I know nothing about those things and I wish I had spent time on them. I think people beat themselves up a little bit too. Like, you become the world's best brain surgeon, but then you're upset that you're not the world's greatest heart surgeon, and it's impossible to be both, right?
So, Cindy, tell us what it is that you're doing now. What are you working with?
Um, so I work for a startup, for an image processing company, but I don't really work on any image processing software. Um, so like I said, I'm a fairly generalist software engineer, which means I do a whole bunch of different things, including API development, infrastructure development, and also a lot of operations because I work for a really small company. And what that means is that as a software engineer, I am expected to also be running all the services that I write. So that is pretty much what I do in a nutshell. And I write about some of the things that I work on or some of the things that I learn about. Primarily, it's more for my own benefit than to actually write. I really just started writing maybe a few months ago this year because for the longest time I didn't believe that I had anything important to say or that I was even doing anything particularly interesting that other people might want to read about about my opinions or my thoughts. So it really began with me starting to write more for my own understanding because I mean writing isn't something new. I have sort of like an extensive series of notebooks and just things that I've jotted down on the side, over the years as I have been learning things. But it just wasn't something I ever thought was even worth making public because I just couldn't really see who else would be interested in these things. But I kind of started writing again more for my own benefit, and I think with platforms like Medium, they just make it really they just lower the bar to just sort of like publish it because you're just writing something for yourself, literally copy paste into something else and hit publish, and a whole bunch of people now can read it. So that's kind of how I really even started writing, and I still don't really consider myself a blogger. It's just writing about things that I learn or writing about things that seem interesting to me. Currently, I'm going through what I call an operations phase. I mean, it's kind of weird because I really am not an operations engineer. I do operations for the code that I write, but it is, I would say, about 15, not more than 15% of my time is spent working on things like, monitoring or deployments or any of the things that I actually write about. And yet that sort of is the thing that I have been writing about, mainly because that's what I don't know. Like building software is something, rather writing programs is something I've been doing for a long time now. But things like actually deploying my own code is surprisingly not something I have been doing for very long. So that's what I don't think I know very well. Which also makes it, you know, which gives me all the more of a reason to actually write about it because being able to just formalize my thoughts, being able to like put it all in one place, and just being able to write helps me understand a lot of these things better. And that's what really got me into writing more than anything else.
Now, do you think that's the reason why a lot of your posts and like Julia Evans' posts and stuff like that like resonate with people is because it's really this developer kind of transitioning into the operations space, which is what a lot of like the DevOps stuff is doing. That
Mhm.
you're sharing your journey with people who are also trying to make the same leap and learn more about operations that came from traditional kind of programming backgrounds.
Um, I'd actually never thought about it that way. I'm even completely surprised that some of the posts that I've written have sort of gotten the attention that they have because it's very new to me. It's also very surprising because like I said, a lot of those things were written more from my own understanding, and it's just very strange to me that something that I personally thought would only ever make sense to me is something that other people find interesting as well. I don't. I'm not sure why that happens or what it is that resonates. I mean, I'm happy to hear that it resonates with a lot of people, but um, I don't know. I mean, for me, a lot of things is also about. I think this is not something that I mean. I'm not the first person to say this, but what I believe is happening right now is a lot of conversation, especially about a lot of tools and a lot of new technologies that are emerging. A lot of the conversation is being monopolized by specific people or specific groups of people who present a very sort of tailored narrative or like a very tailored perspective. And what I feel is lacking is just a different story or just like a different perspective or just a different side of the same story. Um, and I think probably, I mean, I'm guessing the reason why some people think that some of the things that I say make sense or has merit is because it just presents this alternative viewpoint that probably isn't being talked about a lot otherwise. And I think that's very true with let's for instance take the post that I wrote on schedulers. The main reason I wrote that was because it was meant to be an internal doc. It was never meant to be sort of like a public sort of blog post. I mean, I didn't start out writing that with that intention. We're just introduced a scheduler, and my service was the first one to be picked to sort of like, be moved over to that paradigm of deploying applications. And one of the reasons why my service was picked was because it was like a fresh greenfield project that I was working on. So it sort of made sense to pick that because it's brand new. You know, if it failed, it's probably not the worst thing because it gave us a lot of time to test. We weren't really changing anything that's currently in production. So my service was the first that was picked, which also meant that I could no longer just be on the sidelines, just sort of like be hearing what people are saying about it, and just reading these blog posts and these tweets about about everything. But it really meant that I had to actually understand what it was and why we are even doing this. And like I said, I work for a startup, which means that not a lot of things are well documented. And I didn't really have our SREs sit me down and sort of explain everything from like the beginning to the end, saying that, okay, this is how we are doing, this is why things are not working, this is what needs to change, and this is why we're using a scheduler. So a lot of the information in that blog post was just me trying to understand how things are even set up where I work and why things are set up that way and why we're even moving. Because I think understanding that kernel was very important to sort of even understand why we need a scheduler, and then to sort of like even understand how things are going to be changing. So it was so the whole post sort of originated as me trying to just sit down and just understand all these different moving parts, that no one had really documented or wasn't written down anywhere or properly explained, and to sort of demystify all of that once and for all, right? And then once that post was done, I was like, it was an internal doc. It went into a wiki. Then I was like, there's actually nothing here that's super secretive or that cannot actually be shared with other people. So it was extremely long. It was embarrassingly long. And what I thought to myself was that Jesus, this is just so long. Like, just can't possibly imagine who even would want to read it. But then I thought there were some interesting ideas there, or rather, I wanted to know if what I was thinking even really made sense. I mean, it made sense internally to us, but a lot of times I think in software development, it becomes very easy to sort of validate your own viewpoint or your own biases because you talk to other people. In my case, it was my coworkers who also all believe the same. So I thought it would make sense to sort of make it public because that way I could get other people's opinions and just see what maybe even if it was just one other person who read it to sort of maybe find out just what they think and even see if some of our assumptions and some of the way in which we approach these problems actually sort of really made sense, right? So then I published it, and then it sort of took a life of its own, which is still extremely surprising to me. So that's how that came about, and the reason I believe those who liked it did so was again because it was just a different perspective. It was just a different voice, and it was more about actually solving problems as opposed to just using technology. And that is something that I think about a lot. And that is actually something that I spend most of my time doing, solving problems. And technology is just like a tool that I use to solve different problems. But at the end of the day, it's more about problem solving. And I think that a lot of tools, especially the sort of standard opinions and the standard narrative that I get about a lot of these technologies is about, hey, here's this cool new tech. This is what it does. This is how it does it. This is how it's super cool. And, this is why you should be using it. And understandably, because, every single organization and every single person is going to have a different problem. And, it's probably not going to be possible for someone who's creating a tool to go around saying, this is going to solve all of these problems in all of these different ways. So at the end of the day, it becomes, the users of these tools, people like me, people like, my coworkers, people like, my company who actually use these tools to solve our problems, to sort of tell our side of the story, to explain how it really makes sense and, what are the challenges and what are the trade-offs and how things even fit together. So, so I think that's pretty much what I do. And if at all these things make any sense to other people, I'm guessing it's because, these kind of from the trenches story, aren't very widely told.
That is a very good point. I love it. Talking about the actual problems and solutions that you are working with and using these tools to help solve is completely different than just talking about the tools in a vacuum. And I agree with you. I'm sure that that's the main reason why people are so drawn to your writing. I also wanted to say that your posts are extremely well written. It's really rare to find blog posts that are so well written. And I think it's not even to judge people's intelligence. I think people write posts in a hurry just because they have something they want to put out there and everybody has a job. So I don't know how much time you take to craft your post, but it looks like it's really well crafted and really well thought out. Plus, the writing skills really show through. So,
Oh, thank you. It really depends. So the post on clusters took a couple of weeks to write, mainly because like I said, it was just meant to be an internal post, and I was just understanding how these things even worked as I was sort of working with it. So and I wasn't even full time working on schedulers. It was probably, like I said, I spent probably 15% of my time doing operations work. So the vast majority of time during these weeks when I was sort of like writing that post was me just building this new service that we eventually ended up deploying with a scheduler. But that's what I was doing for the vast majority of the time. But there was this other 15 to 20% of the time where I was sort of learning these things because it was very new. And as I was learning, I was sort of writing things down. So that post took several weeks to write actually. Because writing that post wasn't the only thing that I was doing. I was learning things, and I was learning. I should just go jot down this one thing or this one thought that came to me, or sort of this one idea, and at the end of all of it, it became a blog post. I've written other posts that I've written probably been cranked out in a matter of hours. I would say that's the case for most of them. Especially that was the case for a post that I wrote on function length, because I was having a Twitter conversation with Dave Cheney and Sam Boyer and a couple other folks. And I went back home that evening and I just started writing. That was written probably in about 2 hours, and I posted it. And I mean, it immediately made it to Hacker News. And you can understand what the reaction was like. Pretty much everyone calling me an idiot for writing that and for thinking that way. But it was fun. It was probably the most read post of mine, and it's also the most polarizing because got a whole bunch of people agreeing with me, but Jesus, a whole bunch of people also completely disagreed with me. So that was new, and that was fun, and that took like 2 hours to write. Maybe if had I spent more time writing that post, it could have been more. Um, I certainly think it could have been a lot shorter, and that's true with all of my posts. They're probably way too long. I mean, I'm a professional software engineer. I'm not a writer, so this is sort of what I do, in my free time. And again, I'm not writing professionally, so I don't really bother with things like editing and probably making it shorter, not repeating myself. It's kind of weird. It's kind of ironic that I don't, I repeat myself a lot in my blog post, and I also write a blog post about how repeating yourself is not a really bad thing. But yeah, I mean, most of them take a couple of hours to write. The clusters one took much longer, and probably, a lot of these could use a shit ton of editing. I mean, I don't do much of that. It's more like, write something, post, tweet, go to sleep, wake up next morning, and just see what people are saying. And yeah.
Yeah, well, that's very impressive. I'm impressed. I'm impressed both because you're saying, you don't really pay attention to editing, and yet to me, they come out really well written. Even the posts you're saying you didn't spend more than 2 hours. And also because you're saying 2 hours, and I'm thinking, if I don't write blog posts. And I feel like writing posts every once in a while. And if I think it's going to take 2 hours, I'm like, oh my God, I don't have 2 hours. It has to take 5 minutes. But of course, you can't write anything in 5 minutes. So it doesn't get done because I don't want to allocate 2 hours to write a post. But it's a good reminder that these things take time. But it's also worth it because you get to have a conversation about it, or you get to put your thoughts out there, or you get to just write for your own benefit, like you were saying, for your own edification. And another thing that I wanted to say to you is that I personally love the different takes that you have on things. I think it's welcome just for the sake of the opinion being different or contradictory, but you made me think in different ways from reading your posts. And I think it's beneficial to me, definitely. I appreciate it, but I think it's beneficial for the tech community in general to get exposed to that. Even if they at the end they don't agree,
Mhm.
herd mentality is horrible. We need to hear different voices, different opinions.
Yeah, I think that's true though, right? Like a lot of people follow the dogma, right? And I think we need people to challenge that sometimes and for us to at least question, you know, it it's like even a difference of opinion, it can do one of two things. It may make you more empathetic to why other people choose different tooling. Even though you may still believe that something is more superior, you may dismiss them as being completely wrong. And you're right. It just makes you more set in your ways, or it may bring you over to the other side, like you hadn't considered it that way. And there's a lot of stuff, like especially as trends, like say Kubernetes, right? Like I love Kubernetes, but if you're running three DigitalOcean boxes or something like that, like it may be a bit of overkill. And if you're kind of in Cindy's example, like you're working for a company that has a small enough team already, and your developers are also the operations people, like you added overhead in supporting the cluster, time that you don't necessarily have.
Yeah, that's very true. And that brings me back to my original point of actually solving problems, because that's what I do. And that's what most sort of professional software engineers are doing. They're solving business problems for their employers. using tools, um, some of which they may build and some of which they may sort of, repurpose, and some of which they may buy. So, at the end of the day, it really boils down to solving problems. And I think a lot of people sometimes tend to forget that because it's very easy, and I've been guilty of this myself. It's very easy to just get swept over by, by the hype, or just how cool something is, or you know, just how amazing a piece of technology is from a technical perspective, and just sort of want to use that or sort of play with that. I think that's a perfectly sort of legitimate instinct, and I feel that all the time when I read about something that's super cool. I'm like, oh, that's so amazing. I want to work with that. But I think it becomes extremely important not to treat your employer as some sort of playground where you can just go and play with whatever tool you want. And especially when it comes to like tools like Kubernetes, which is both amazing and it's also incredibly complex, right? And at the end of the day, it's about making decisions as to is this complexity even warranted? What's it going to buy us? And what happens if we don't do this? What really is the opportunity cost here? Are we willing to make this investment? And what are its biggest benefits? And if we decide to do this, like how will it fit in with what we already have? And just how is all this going to work out? Because I think that's less spoken about, as opposed to what Kubernetes is and what it does and what it doesn't do. And it's most discussions around Kubernetes is just an example. Right? This is true about any technology, really. But
Oh yeah, and this isn't new, right? Like
this
we've been
isn't.
adopting, yeah, we've been adopting,
Mhm.
bleeding edge software for ages and putting it in production. Especially Brian and I, we are terrible about it.
Mostly me though. I usually just talk Eric into it.
Remember my addiction with the fact that we needed a GPU database, even if we had to build one.
Oh my god. Okay. Yeah. Guilty.
And these are like amazing things, and honestly think people should be sort of like going completely wild in their free time with whatever crazy technology they want to work with, or they want to build, or they want to play with. But at the end of the day, most of us, at least most of the people I know, are working for employers, and we are solving business problems. And you know it it becomes extremely important to balance the sort of technologist's instinct to adopt cool new things with balance the instinct to use new things, and at the same time really solve problems that the company is actually having, and continuously build products that's going to make the company more money. And and I think I've most certainly been guilty of prioritizing one thing over the other, and that's a lesson I've learned. And it becomes really important to be cognizant of that, even when we find something super interesting or super cool.
I think it's easy to feel like you're being left behind, right?
Oh yeah.
Like when it feels like the whole industry is going containers and Kubernetes, and you're like, oh, but we're still using Ansible or Puppet or something like that. And it's just, it's easy to feel that way. But at the end of the day, if you're building quality software that's highly available, then you're doing your job. And so I worked for a manager one time that had a cool rule. So for greenfield projects where you're building something new for the company, you got a credit. You could pick one bleeding edge technology, but everything else had to be well proven already. And I thought that that was a pretty good rule, right? Because you always end up down these rabbit holes where it's significantly more complex, or you run into weird bugs that nobody's had before. There's just not a lot of content. There's not a lot of people to tap to help you when you run into weird things that nobody's ever seen before. So, building your whole stack on new technologies gets extremely difficult.
That's true. And another downside to new technology is the operational burden of it. I'm a software engineer, and it is one thing for me to say, I want to use this cool new language or this, cool new framework. But when I'm also sort of wearing the ops hat, even if it's just for 15% of my time, sort of actually working with it, actually being responsible for, for what it does and operate, when it's in production, means that I kind of completely see the other side, the flip side to a lot of these newer unproven technology, and that it's operationally incredibly difficult to reason about. Especially, it's incredibly difficult to reason about failure modes that aren't well advertised or well publicized. Which again brings back the importance of things like observability and monitoring, and why it becomes important to for observability or monitoring not to really be an afterthought, but to sort of be a part of system design, and to be something that one ideally proactively thinks about. And I think the good thing with old boring technology is that being able to proactively predict failure modes, or being able to even understand how it needs to be instrumented or how it needs to be monitored, is really easy as compared to something that's bleeding edge, because all these blog posts about people explaining their actual their story about how they use it isn't quite written as yet. All these things are like, these are things that people have to figure out themselves. And my philosophy is that when I'm writing a new service or when I'm operating a service, the fewer things that I have to actually figure out for myself, the better. I mean, it's not going to be possible to completely have everything, figured out for you already, right? Because, if that were the case, none of us would have jobs. But it becomes really beneficial if, the number of failure modes that you run into, or the number of surprises that, you could potentially have, are very less.
Very good points.
So you had started talking about the one post that was one of the most popular that hit Hacker News, and you kind of got some slack about, which was your kind of short methods post.
Oh,
Did you
yeah.
want to kind of give a little bit of insight into that? Like, what was the negative reaction to that? Was it kind of like overread into? Kind of they assumed you were taking a polarized view where it was like never a small method ever.
It was more about people genuinely believing that a lot of the things that I said weren't something that they agreed with. And that is totally fine. It wasn't particularly negative than the fact that vast majority of people, these are people who sort of commented, were sort of like disagreeing with me, right? There are a handful of sort of like pretty negative posts, but that's fine. The vast majority, at least, of people who sort of disagreed were just disagreeing with the content. Some people complained that it lacked examples, but again, I cranked it out in 2 hours. It wasn't like something I spent 2 days writing. So that probably explains why I didn't feel the need to inject a whole bunch of examples. And I also think in a lot of cases, examples can be very contrived. It's kind of hard to sort of translate, a real problem that one sees in a real code base that has been, developed over several years by several different people with just several different styles, and a code base that's been built to satisfy increasingly different and varying business requirements and constraints. An example can be, yeah, technically you can write an example, but it's just very, very hard to really capture what you're saying, or like, at least in my case, it's like really capture the experience that I've had with, like saying, hey, here's an example, like, here's a function, right? Split it into two things and sort of makes sense. And that probably explains one of the reasons why there weren't too many examples. And a lot of people felt that, a lot of the content of that post was very abstract. And I understand that it can, come across as abstract to someone who hasn't really felt the same pain. And that's also the flip side of writing posts, in that it's probably not going to strike the same chord with a lot of people. But the good side is that it also had a lot of people writing to me and just saying how much they agreed with it, and that's pretty cool as well, because at least it's not just me feeling that way. So most of it wasn't particularly negative. It's just like a lot of people disagreed with me, and that's fine. Um, you know, I wasn't really trying to be contrary for the sake of being contrary. It was more about something that I genuinely thought didn't make sense. Because I grew up reading all these books. I grew up reading Clean Code and Refactoring and book on design patterns by the Gang of Four, and for a long time I'd sort of internalized all of that myself. And I've written a lot of code, a lot of bad code. That was just me trying to completely adopt these ideas and shoehorn whatever code that I was writing to adhere to these principles. And what I've learned is that doing that doesn't necessarily lead to better code. It doesn't even lead to better user experiences. And that's something that I'm very cognizant of these days, is that the code we write is actually a user experience to another developer who's going to be also working on it, right? And taking some ideas that you might find in a book or a blog post and just blindly applying that to something that you're building could actually prove to end up providing a really bad user experience to other people. Because something that might seem very obvious to you, something that might seem very very simple, might actually not be the case for like someone else, especially for someone completely new to the code base or even the technology or the tool. Because the way they think about it might be, they might be missing a lot of context, a lot of the assumptions that went into some of the decisions you made. And I think making these things explicit is probably the most helpful thing that one can do to provide a good user experience to another person, or make it at least very intuitive. And when it comes to code, I think the best way to make something intuitive is just to be explicit. And that is, I think, one of the most amazing features of Go, is that what you see is what you get. There's like no magic. There is no sort of like hidden abstractions or like any talk of zero cost abstractions or any of this. It's just like dead simple, right? It's verbose. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but it is dead simple. It is what you look at it and you can understand what it does. And that's amazing. And that's extremely valuable, and it's extremely valuable for providing good user experiences to other developers.
I couldn't agree more with what you said, everything, and especially what you said, the last, that Go is very different and strives to make everything explicit. I absolutely love that about Go too. And as far as your blog post on small functions, for me personally, when I started programming, I was more struggling with knowing how to do it right. But I still struggle. It was just that I struggled a lot more than learning how to do it perfect. But I always kept reading books like Clean Code and Pragmatic Programmer and Martin Fowler books, and learning how to best practices. And then when I started doing Ruby, I was at a point that I was more or less had enough experience with software development, let's say. But I was learning Ruby as well, and watched a bunch of conference talks online and read a lot of books. And it was so much about don't repeat yourself and write small functions, refactor. So I came to Go from that perspective. And then I noticed the files were so long and the functions were longer than I was used to. But it didn't faze me because I quickly saw it just worked. Everything's there. I'm loving this. I didn't question it. I didn't strive to apply the Ruby or Ruby on Rails dogma, maybe even, to Go, because I just took it as it was. I didn't try to change what I was seeing. And when I read your post, it resonated with me, and what caught my attention was that the combination of having had experience of doing Go for long enough to feel comfortable with a different way of doing things, which is to say longer functions, making things very explicit, repeating yourself, like Dave says all the time, is much better to repeat yourself than to just abstract things away, especially if you're doing it too soon. A lot of I meant Dave Cheney, and a lot of people say that as well. So a combination of that, and also the fact that your post was so well written, because if it was a blog post writing about this, but the post had been written, so in a so way, I wouldn't give it much thought. But then your post is really well written, and it really caught my attention, and I was thinking, this absolutely makes sense. It is not to say that it has to be that all the time, everywhere, every language, but it resonates with me and the work I do, and works out much better this way.
Thank you.
One of the things that you mentioned, Cindy, that resonated with me was was the idea of building examples that don't necessarily make sense just because it's hard to build examples. And that was something that always gave me the hardest time building training materials, because you're trying to exercise a particular point or a topic, and you don't want to build an entire application to prove that point. But sometimes making those examples that teach a thing are really difficult. And students would always say, what does this have to do with anything? Well, I'm trying to show you interfaces, but we can't really show you interfaces without building some sort of app.
Right. I think it's a lot easier for authors of books though, because they can sort of start with one example and keep building on top of that. Um, that totally will not work for like the blog post format, because it's just super hard to sort of, unless one is like doing a series of posts where they sort of repurpose the same example. But if it's just one isolated thing, it's just super hard. I mean, I'm sure there are ways, but it's something that I find extremely hard to sort of capture, without really making examples seem very contrived. And I had a lot of people actually write to me saying that, oh, here's the simple. I mean, I actually tried doing that a little bit, where I was like, well, imagine if you have, a function which is all about creating a user in a database, right? Which is, I think that's like a super common example. Like any application or like any service, has that supports like users logging in, has that feature. And but that was sort of, I sort of did that by halves, because I was like, okay, so let's think of this example where you have to create a user, right? So the point that I was trying to get across is that when you say small function should do one thing, that one thing can be really hard to define, right? Like creating a user can, from a logical perspective, it's one thing, but actually involves several things. Like you create a user in the database, then probably send them an email, you write an event to like a message bus like Kafka, so that all the analytics tools can pick that up. That was a really sort of contrived example to say that like doing one thing doesn't necessarily just mean doing one thing; it could mean several things. But a lot of people wrote to me saying that, of course, those things have to be separate functions. Like, why would you want to put all of that in one function? And whereas that really wasn't my point. It wasn't my point that those all have to be one big function. But the idea I was trying to convey there is that one logical thing maps to more than one sort of programmatic thing. And a lot of times these boundaries get very blurred, because not everything that can be sort of programmatically isolated into potentially unit testable things necessarily should be. And when it actually does make sense to actually do that, which in my opinion is when you have network calls involved, or you're writing to disk or something, or you're just doing anything that's just not completely just very programmatic, right? So I mean, if I could go back, I'd actually go back and edit that post a lot, because I just kind of feel that a lot of things, a lot of ideas could be expressed both more concisely and more lucidly. But frankly, I don't think I'm going to be bothered. It's done. It's over. Probably write a different one. That's all.
Yeah, and I find myself actually doing the opposite of refactoring into small functions with my code in Go. Sometimes I see small functions that I just wipe out and put the code back inside the function, or I refactor things out and then I change my mind and put it back in. I find myself doing that a lot more than refactoring things out into tiny functions.
I think the one thing people underestimate is, just how hard it can be when you technically just have to move around, even when you're reading code. I mean, I had one of my coworkers who sort of started writing started working on a Go project, and he started, thinking about what packages should be, what the API should look like, and he probably gave way too much thought to that way too soon. 2 weeks into the project, he told me that, I've actually given up. I've put everything in a package called main, and actually a function called main, because he was like, I was so fed up with just making all these decisions. I just wanted to get this thing working. So it's now one package main. It really was just one file, and it was just one function called main. And he kind of got that working. And then he went back and sort of refactored things a little bit. Or maybe he didn't. I don't know. I should ask him if it's like still just one big main function. But I definitely remember him sort of trying to decide on what the API should look like, what the package boundary should look like. the first thing that he did when he started this project was do that. And then a couple of weeks later, he was like, Jesus, I think I've complicated this way too much. I'm just going to put everything in one main function and get it actually working. So I think it's a lot easier to abstract later in the process than to do it upfront. In this case, it's just a really extreme example of someone just writing their whole application, in one function, especially the function main. But I have definitely seen a lot of projects that actually have just one package called main, where a lot of things that could have been smaller packages, were just all sort of like put in one main thing, one main package. At the end of the day, I think it comes down to how easy or not something is to maintain, and how easy or not something is for someone new to the code base to understand. And optimizing for these two things, I think, should be the goal, which could a lot of times mean sort of going against the grain or doing things that may not seem very intuitive to purists. But at the end of the day, it's all about trade-offs. And there's never, and I think this is the point I was really trying to get across in that blog post, was that it really is never about perfection, because what seems perfect today could just be completely invalidated tomorrow when you have a bug report or a new requirement. And as such, if the goal is to just build something that is good enough, that can be extended and that can be modified, without requiring a lot of cognitive overhead, or even without requiring, a fully fledged refactor, to sort of make it good enough and not perfect, probably makes a lot of sense to me, because, that helps in writing maintainable code. And it also helps in, writing code that's not, it's not perfect, which means that, a lot of people are going to, look at that code and say, hey, I could, all these things could be done in such a different way and it could be so much better. And the thing is, it could be a lot better, for a very short period of time. Right. And I think that is what a lot of people fail to understand, is that perfection is sort of short lived, especially in software development. You can achieve it, but it really is going to be short lived, versus, being good enough, which can actually get you a very, very long way. And, especially for those of us writing software and writing services that, have, or that are designed to have some amount of longevity. And I think it makes sense to sort of like, most successful projects are projects that sort of evolve and live on, right? It's not like something that you're just going to put in production, then 2 weeks later just get rid of. And for a lot of these extremely long running, and potentially any project that one wishes, to be successful, the goal there should be to just make it good enough, not really perfect, because, perfection is, again, like I said, short lived.
Yeah, I agree with absolutely every single thing you said, and it in the end it is about trade-offs, and it really sucks when you start making the trade-offs too soon. For example, like you're saying, the example you cited of your friend or coworker putting everything in the main package. It's hard to say that there is only one right way to do things, but for me, that is absolutely the right way to do it. Do it like that, and then think about how splitting things up later, because you're gonna, depending on what it is that the end product ends up being, you're going to use different decisions to work that out. Because otherwise, you're making, at least that's how it happens to me. If I try to make those decisions up front, I go through the painful process of making that decision and figuring it out. And then at the end, I see that I didn't make the right call. It's really hard to make the right call up front before you have the finished product, or sort of what the finished product should be. And then I have to make the same decision, go through the same decision process again. So the more I work, the more I aim for the things that you were saying, like readability and easy to understand code, versus optimizing for other things. And even when I start writing a function and I don't know what the function exactly is going to be, or the scope of that function is going to be once it's done, I just type like ASDF as the name of the function. That just whatever I type on the keyboard, put a parenthesis in the brackets, and then I'll write the function. And then I'll name it after it's done. I don't try to, otherwise I spend so much time trying to like, what is the shortest best name for this function, and I haven't even written the function yet. I sort of know what it's going to do, but once I'm done, it might be a bit different than what I was thinking. I might split things up. So what's the point of going through that decision-making process up front? It's a waste of time and effort. Anyway, I think we should move on to project news.
I think we should. I think we've got 5 or 6 minutes left of the show. So, interesting projects and news. And we've been gone for about 2 weeks. So, probably the first out is Go 1.9 is out of RC. So, it is officially released. Please download it.
Yay. Go get some. And Eric has a new job. I think that's probably the more exciting news than any of this. Why don't you tell us about that, Eric?
I do have a new job. So I announced last week we didn't have a show, but I am joining Brian and everybody on Microsoft Azure.
It's almost literally everybody.
Brian and everybody.
We got to get Carlesia, and then it'll be the whole show.
I know. Oh, I also have an announcement. I don't have a new job. That's my announcement.
That's awesome.
And for the record, I'm very happy where I am. So Microsoft hasn't asked, but if Microsoft asks, you don't even need to ask. I'm really happy where I am, not looking to move.
I was really happy where I was too, but the opportunity to work on Kubernetes and Docker and all of that stuff, all of the things that I love to do in my spare time during my business hours is really awesome.
Yeah, that's incredible for you guys.
So what else we got? Community outreach working group. That was a couple days ago. Yeah.
And we don't even know how to pronounce it. So there was a blog post.
Kauji.
Kauji, who knows? But we have a community outreach working group, and our goal is obviously to spread the love of Go throughout lots of communities, but more importantly, help people help others learn Go. And you can read about that at blog.golang.org. And there's lots of us members.
And feel free to jump in too, Cindy, if you can think of anything that's come out in the past week or so that everybody should know about.
So actually, I read a really good blog post yesterday. It doesn't really pertain to Go so much, but it really is about how to optimize services for both low latency and high throughput. I saw it on the blog of Dropbox, and it was very dense, and it was also extremely interesting.
Just tweeted that link out too. Yes. Very good blog post. My favorite kind.
I think I saw you tweet that out, Brian. I haven't got a chance to read it yet. And on a similar note, Samsara, they do like a IoT device for cars. They've got a blog post, and we'll link it in the show notes. But they're running Go on low memory devices, like 170 megabytes, something along those lines of memory for this kind of in-vehicle device that does some camera stuff and telemetry that it reports back. So I thought that was cool. If you read through, basically, they end up kind of tweaking the garbage collector, but it's an interesting read. If you like low-level stuff, David Wong.fr/GoASM is like a really cool kind of walkthrough of like some example Go code and how it translates to Go's internal kind of assembly language that it uses. So if you like to kind of learn about that stuff, that's really interesting.
Yeah, you can keep the assembly code. That's all you, buddy.
I like that stuff. I mean, I don't want to sit here and write applications in assembly, but I like being able to troubleshoot stuff and look through the actual assembly language that gets generated.
Got one more news item. There's a good blog post at blog.minio.io about a new standard for data at rest encryption. The blog post summarized said basically that we do lots about encryption in transit, but there's no standard for encryption at rest. So they propose a standard, and a Go implementation of that standard sounds really interesting, and I liked their reasoning for the whole thing, and they intend to use that Dare, which if you're an 80s kid like me, just makes me laugh. But they intend to use Dare for their client and server versions of Minio.
That is fantastic. And that may actually, I was thinking about mentioning a blog post, but it might not have anything to do with Go. The Signal use Go? Signal app? I seem to
I don't.
recall that they do. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know.
But real quick, Signal, the messaging app,
hmm
they have a blog post explaining the encrypted profiles that they have now in public beta. And I haven't finished reading the whole thing, but it's just the things that you don't even think about that should be encrypted or could be encrypted, and how they're being so careful about really, providing privacy for people who are using messaging, encrypting images. This stuff is so important. People don't realize it. So there.
Good stuff.
And real quick too, I wanted to go back to the working group news announcements, and just mention that it's for everybody. People frequently ask how they can get involved in the community. This is perfect because they have a list of issues. First of all, you can open a new issue. Anybody can do that. Obviously it's open source, it's for the community. But they already have a list of issues that you can comment on. You can volunteer to help out, to take the lead. It's fantastic, and a bunch of different things, all kinds of things that need to be done. There's something for everybody.
Nice. How about Free Software Friday? Cindy, this is a segment of the show where we like to give a shout out to a open source project or maintainer or group or pretty much anybody that's doing open source that we happen to appreciate. And it doesn't even have to be Go related. My Free Software Friday shout out this week is to Minio because I love them a lot. And they're doing awesome stuff in S3 compatible file storage and releasing good tools just all around the board. They're great corporate citizens and they're kind of awesome.
Yeah, Minio is a super, super cool company. I really want to thank Fabian. I don't know if you guys know him. Fabian Reinhardt, I think. He's a Prometheus core maintainer, and that dude single-handedly rewrote the entire Prometheus storage engine for Prometheus 2.0. Like, it was just one guy doing all of that. And I don't know if you've been following some of the blog posts and some of the new performance improvements, especially in the storage engine of Prometheus that's coming up in the new 2.0 release. But it's just super cool, and so really I want to thank Fabian for that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, sounds like beast mode.
Right? How about you, Carlicia?
I don't have a thing.
So I'm gonna I know it's Free Software Friday, but I'm gonna break that due to kind of everything that's been going on. So with everything going on in Houston, like the whole have you guys heard the whole Cajun Army thing?
Yes.
No.
Like, so there is a group of people kind of across the country that after Katrina and stuff kind of put themselves together, volunteers. They call themselves the Cajun Army. And like when Houston hit, like they were driving from everywhere, bringing boats and everything like that. They had radios going back and forth. People, some people were out in boats and trucks. Some people were at home just playing dispatch. Basically working with the people who are stuck in their houses and giving them advice and prioritizing calls and dispatching them out to volunteer rescuers on boats and stuff like that. So, it's not software, but I think that they deserve a huge shout out. Everybody who participated in any manner for that, because seeing people help people is just awesome.
Yeah, right on. And they're acting like the I don't want to use the word unprofessional, but unauthorized National Guard. They're just stepping in where they need to help, and it's been amazing watching what they're doing. Unofficial, not unauthorized.
Yeah. One sounds criminal.
Yeah,
it doesn't. It's like, way to go! I just hyped them up, Brian, and then you called them criminals.
They're criminals. It's fake news.
I guess is it okay to thank another project, would it be fine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Cool. The other project that I have been that sort of came out about a year ago, and that I think has gotten a lot of traction since, has been Envoy. Um, I think Lyft open sourced it, and it's in the service mesh category. So everything that has to do with microservices and service-oriented architectures, and why a service mesh necessarily makes sense there. And what's been interesting in the recent few days, or rather the recent few weeks, is that the first thing first, I think Envoy has. I don't think it is a part of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation as yet, but I believe they are voting on that. And so I think that'll be super cool. And more importantly, I have seen discussions about potentially building it into Kubernetes itself. So, it becomes the official sort of mesh for all Kubernetes applications. And I think the main person behind or the main person driving Envoy development is Matt Klein at Lyft, and I think he was primarily responsible for open sourcing it and for shepherding it ever since. And I think he's just been doing some great work on this. And more importantly, it kind of makes sense, and it's also really interesting about potentially building Envoy into Kubernetes, is because I think Envoy is very, very similar to an internal Google system that they have. I don't know if it has an official name, but talking to a couple of Google engineers, what I heard is that like pretty much every Google service, has sidecar proxy, which does pretty much everything that Envoy does. So, as we know, Kubernetes itself is based on the Borg scheduler that was developed at Google. And what I'm finding incredibly interesting is that a lot of the auxiliary tooling and a lot of the surrounding infrastructure is now being available for everyone to use, and that is actually pretty awesome. And it's also pretty awesome that there's some great people who are very committed to bringing these pretty advanced tools to the rest of us. I think Prometheus as well is an example of a tool that is built based on an internal Google tool, but then which fits in really well with the whole Kubernetes ecosystem, because it all just sort of plays really well with one another. And I think Envoy is another such tool. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see some of the developments in the infrastructure space in the next few years, because with sort of Kubernetes rapidly approaching to being the standard way in which people are going to deploy applications in the future. It's going to be really interesting to see just how other supporting tools are going to be built in, and more importantly, at least for me, it's about how easy these tools, or like how seamless these tools are going to be to adopt, and to gain the most benefits from.
And I want to point out that Cindy has a blog post talking about Envoy and comparing it to AJ Proxy and NGX. It's a pretty cool post.
Yeah, I've been following Envoy for a few months, and yeah, I haven't got to play with it yet, and I've been itching too, and I'm hoping soon. But it looks ridiculously cool, and it's like wire compatible with, let's say, Mongo, a couple of databases, gRPC it supports natively, and some things like that. It's ridiculously cool.
Yeah, it's MongoDB and Dynamo, and I believe they're adding Redis support as well. I think primarily as of now, I think Google now have commit access to the repo, so it's just not Lyft's effort. I think they're at Google, they have like a dedicated team working just on Envoy, which is incredible that you can actually have this project and get like a company like Google devote some of their engineers to actually help improve your product. But currently it's just MongoDB, DynamoDB, and I think Redis support is being added. Though I can imagine why support for things like the MySQL wire protocol or the Kafka protocol would be just incredibly cool, and just going to help increase adoption.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how that comes along, especially if it becomes a CNCF project.
Right.
All right. So I think we are a little over time, but we're good.
What's new?
So We're always over time. So didn't we start this out at like 20 minutes? Wasn't that going to be the original goal when we started this podcast?
It was going to be a short
Yes.
little podcast. That's okay.
It's perfect the way it is, I think.
Now we're at an hour, and I don't even think we keep that. So with that, thanks everybody. Especially thank you, Cindy, for coming on and talking with us. I wish we had more time, but we got to stop the show somewhere. Huge thank you to all of the listeners. Definitely share the show with friends and coworkers. You can find us on Twitter at GoTimeFM. If you want to be on the show, have suggestions for guests or topics, find us on github.com/GoTimeFM/ping. And with that, goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next week. Although I won't see everybody next week. I'll be gone for 2 weeks. But everybody else will see you next week.
Somebody will see somebody next week. This show is great.
Somebody will be here. We promise.
We'll have our people call your people.
I'll be here.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
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 All right, that's it for this episode of Go Time. Tune in live on Thursdays at 3 p.m. U.S. Eastern at changelog.com/live. Join the community and Slack with us in real time during the shows. Head to changelog.com/community. Follow us on Twitter. We're at GoTimeFM. Special thanks to Fastly, our bandwidth partner. Head to fastly.com to learn more. Also, Linode. We host everything we do on Linode servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. GoTime is edited by Jonathan Youngblood, and the theme music for GoTime is produced by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. We'll see you again next week. Thanks for listening.